Hello, everyone. My name is Danielle. I am a student studying at Alliance Graduate School, and I'm currently taking up Masters of Arts in Counseling. This video is a psychoeducation on equipping parents and youth leaders. So I would like to thank my professor, Dr. June Ardina, for teaching us on the subject of parenting enrichment, which is why this psychoeducation was also made possible. So I'm just going to share with you my screen. The title of my psychoeducation program is Parenting the Emotional Youth. So I titled this Parenting the Emotional Youth, not pertaining or not saying that the are the only ones who are emotional, but we would like to focus on the aspect of the emotional aspect of the person, on how we can parent our children when it comes to being an emotional being. With that, what are the objectives that we have for this talk? So these are what we will go into later on. We will look into our past experiences as children, discover how we ourselves parent the youth and how this is related to our past experiences, understand how a child grows, and finally learn ways how we can parent well the youth. Okay, so by the way, as I will be presenting to you this program, as I'm presenting to you this, as I have this talk here, if you are currently watching this with a group of people, like a large audience, then I would suggest that you can divide yourselves into groups of 3. And because later on, we will have these kinds of discussions. There will be some points in my presentation where I will ask you to reflect, and it would be nice for you if you will be able to discuss it within your groups. But if you are doing on your own, then that is also fine. You can just do your own personal reflection. And during those times, you can also pause the video so that you can have that time for discussion. So this is actually the first part of what you will be discussing among yourselves. For you, what do you think are some of the challenges that the youth is facing today? So I can give you about 10 minutes to do that. You can pause this video if you're with your group right now. So to proceed, if you have shared with your group or maybe have thought about it, maybe you noticed that in today's like the young generation today, especially right now in the season of pandemic, a lot of people are struggling with depression, anxiety, and the mental health issues are actually becoming more given attention to compared to before. And we want to see why this is happening and how these kinds of behaviors and issues are affected or and have like made their way, or why it is happening currently in this generation that we have. And we will discover that the way that we treat the youth and the way they were parented can contribute to why they are experiencing what they're experiencing right now, especially as they deal with their emotions. So that is also going to be the main aspect. So like what I mentioned, since there are so many things that we can tackle when it comes to parenting children. We are rational beings. We're spiritual, emotional, physical, relational, intellectual, sexual, and volitional, but we won't be able to cover everything in this talk. So the emotional side is what I want to focus on. And with that, I want to start by sharing to you the attachment theory. This is a theory that has helped me understand also more of how, as a child, or how our different attachments that were formed as a child correlates to the kind of attachment we do now as adults. And the attachment theory is actually by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth. So just to define what attachment is simply the relationship or strong emotional bond that develops between an infant and his or her primary caregiver. So according to John Bowlby, there are stages of attachment. The first one would be the pre-attachment. This is from birth to 6 weeks. Uh, this is where the baby shows no particular attachment to a specific caregiver. So at this time, maybe they're still not very aware of their surroundings, but actually, the care or the touch of a mother is already crucial during this time of their lives. The indiscriminate now is where the baby is from 6 weeks to 7 months. Infant begins to show preference for primary and secondary caregivers. So they're actually beginning to um, like recognize their parents. They're recognizing what their preference is when it comes to being to how they should be taken care of. And then the third stage would be the discriminate. This would be 7 months and more. The infant shows strong attachment to one specific caregiver. So basically, the infant now has chosen a specific primary caregiver where she or he shows a very strong attachment with or to. And then the last stage would be the multiple. So that is 10 plus months, growing bonds with other caregivers. So this can also include siblings, cousins, and other members of the family that's within the household. I want to show with you a video of an experiment that was done with infants or toddlers and with their mothers. So I want you to closely observe what happens.
This experiment, which I watched through a two-way mirror, is designed to gauge how secure is the crucial relationship between mother and child.
This bunny is going to go here. That bunny.
Value of the test has been established in studies that would watch a child, 1-year-old, and then follow it up and interview them about the relationships to their parents when they were 21 years old. So we're quite confident in the long-term significance of this relationship.
After several minutes play, the mother is signaled to leave the room.
I'll get you back in 1 minute.
But she'll survive. The key moment in the experiment is the child's reaction to her mother's return.
The important clue is whether the baby's able to become calmed down by the contact with the mother, get back to play. Sometimes it takes a couple of minutes. You see, when the mother was out, she was only interested in the mother, no interest in the toys. Now she's in contact with her mother. She's beginning to show a little interest in the environment, and shortly she'll be right back with the toys when it's time.
So you would call this a secure zone?
Yes.
It's certainly much heavier.
Close to the door following her, Now, we sent the mother right back in. The point here is not to distress the baby. We're just trying to challenge it. The baby puts her hands to her face, a sad expression, her face down. When she picks her up, she keeps her head down, her arms out, and then she sits in the chair holding the baby. The baby's still sullen. He's low-keyed.
So you would call this insecure?
Yes, insecure. He's avoidant. He's not engaging her, and it's not the reunion's not effective. It's important to remember here that the thing that upset him was her absence. Her return should be the solution to his problem. This is another pattern that we see in babies who are not good at using their mother as a secure base at home. This baby is also insecure. But you'll see, we got a look at his play before the separation. The mother's left. When she returns, she picks him up. He can't calm down. He's still upset. She offers a toy to amuse him or to comfort him or to distract him, and he slaps it away. She offers another, he slaps it away. He's angry. We call these babies resistant or ambivalent because they both want her back and yet can't use the contact. We think that the difficulty is that in the past, when he sought comfort, she's been inconsistent as to whether she's available and responsive or not.
Okay. This time I want to share with you the 4 kinds of attachments as we have also observed from the video. There are 4 kinds of attachment. The first one would be secure attachment and the rest would be insecure. So let's go into those. The first one is the most ideal attachment, which is the secure attachment. The infant demonstrates a willingness to explore a new environment while the primary caregiver is around. He or she is upset when left alone or with a stranger, but greets the primary caregiver happily upon his or her return and actively seeks comfort from them. As you can see also from, as you saw from the video, the first example was a child who exhibited a secure attachment. So children with secure attachment are those who can have a sense of trust that their parents are gonna, or their caregivers are going to return because their parents has given them a secure base. And then the second kind of attachment would be the insecure avoidant attachment. When the primary caregiver left the first time, these infants were not upset and avoided her upon return. After the primary caregiver left the second time, the infant was visibly upset, but still avoided the caregiver upon return. Actually, later we'll be discussing more thoroughly about these different attachments, but still I'm just going to give you an overview of all of them. So for the insecure avoidant attachment, these are, as you have also observed from the video, the second example was a child who did not really had a secure attachment with his caregiver, which is why it didn't really matter if his caregiver returned or not. He stayed avoided because of that. The third attachment is the insecure resistant attachment. These infants became extremely upset when left by the primary caregiver. When she returned, the infant alternately sought contact and then actively pushed her away. For the resistant or ambivalent insecure kind of attachment, these are usually people who have been inconsistently attended to, since they wouldn't know or they're not sure if their caregiver is going to attend to their needs all the time. They can really either be too clingy or they can be too rejecting. So just like the third example from the video, the child didn't really know how to contain himself even if his caregiver was already around. The fourth kind of attachment would be the insecure, disorganized attachment. Infants who seemed sort of dazed by being reunited with their primary caregiver. They froze mid movement or engaged in repetitive behaviors. These children who have disorganized attachment, so if we can actually compare this with the rest of the attachment, this is the only one that's disorganized while the rest are organized, because the disorganized attachment is usually infants who were couldn't really move, like they either froze or they engaged in repetitive behavior. So usually these people, or people who um, have this kind of attachment, were either really abused or neglected as children. So for us to know more about these four attachments, I would want us to watch this video by Psych2Go.
Hey, Psych2Goers. Do you ever catch yourself doing something like having a mini panic attack when you're asked to speak in front of others? Or maybe needing to be the center of attention all the time and wonder, why do I do that? Part of the answer lies in how you bonded with your parents during your childhood. The way you were raised, where you were raised, and your relationship with your family shapes a large part of who you'll become as an adult. If you've been watching Psych2Go for a while, you know that your childhood affects you in some weird and unexpected ways. We put some links to those videos in the description box below. One of the ways your childhood molds you into the person you are is the development of your attachment style. This video talks about the 4 attachment styles, as well as how you can spot them at work or school, in relationships, and in a crisis. You might be wondering, what is an attachment style, and why should I care? Thanks to the research of Harry Harlow and John Bowlby, the mental health community uses the phrase attachment style to describe the ways we interact with and attach to others throughout our lives. As you might have guessed, you start developing your attachment style as an infant. It's first formed by the way you bond with your caregivers, then continues to be shaped throughout your childhood. Understanding your attachment style is a big deal because it can tell you a lot about how you relate to your friends and family, how you work with groups of people, and how you handle problems or obstacles in your life. Of course, there are other things such as your temperament, culture, and self-talk that influence the way you deal with people. But for now, let's learn more about attachment style. In 1970, psychologist Mary Ainsworth wanted to know more about how children with different temperaments attach to their parents and what this says about how they relate to the rest of the world. Would they get separation anxiety when they were away from their mother, or would they settle into their environment just fine? Her research has shown us people form attachments in one of 4 ways. 1. Secure, type B. People with this attachment style are confident their needs will be met. They're the most likely to assert themselves and ask for help. 2. Insecure, avoidant, type A. People with this attachment style tend to appear more withdrawn and independent. They don't usually believe others will meet their needs and rarely ask for help. 3. Insecure, ambivalent, resistant, type C. People with this attachment style can be difficult to read because they alternate between being super clingy and rejecting others. They're often insecure and seem to have trouble exploring new situations. 4. Disorganized. People with this attachment style view all interactions with others as if they're a chance to solve old traumatic situations from their past. They tend to suffer from depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Those with a disorganized attachment style are more likely than the other 3 styles to use negative things like drugs, alcohol, or starting drama to disconnect from painful feelings. If everyone has an attachment style, then you can probably name at least one person in your life with each style. Let's take a look at how the 4 styles relate to others at work, school, in relationships, and in a crisis. If these examples remind you of anyone, tell us about it in the comments. 1. Secure attachment style, type B. At work or school, people with a secure attachment style are typically focused and good communicators. They're the least likely to get involved in gossip or drama, but the most likely to ask questions at meetings or sit in the front of the class. In relationships, people with a secure attachment style are the most likely to make the first move and the least likely to play head games. They tend to have healthy boundaries and are usually respectful of others' boundaries. In a crisis, although those with a secure attachment style don't enjoy drama or crisis, they're able to manage their emotions and see the big picture when problems happen. They keep their cool enough to tolerate differences of opinion and help smooth over hurt feelings. 2. Insecure avoidant type A. At work or school, the person with an insecure avoidant attachment style probably has difficulty making friends and is probably seen as a loner at school or work. They tend to be more focused on the work itself rather than the social part of group projects. In relationships, your friend or significant other with an insecure avoidant attachment style may have problems talking about or even identifying how they're feeling. They tend to be happier talking about more intellectual topics. The person with an insecure avoidant attachment style is also more likely to be that friend who tells you nothing's wrong, then explodes with anger. In a crisis, the person with an insecure avoidant attachment style goes out of their way to avoid super emotional situations, which actually makes them great in a crisis. They're able to use their more objective nature to take charge and do what's needed in order to solve a problem. 3. Insecure ambivalent resistant type C. At work or school, these are the classmates and coworkers who always seem preoccupied or anxious. People with a type C attachment style tend to be more sensitive about their work and need more reassurance than other attachment styles. In relationships, those with a type C attachment style are often labeled as way too sensitive because they react strongly to anything that seems like they're being rejected by. This may cause a person with a type C attachment style to be clingy or attempt to reject you before you reject them. They also tend to blame others for their relationship issues. In a crisis, people with the type C attachment style seem to feed on drama and will often stir the pot during a crisis. Because of their anxiety and habit of personalizing others' behavior, those with an insecure ambivalent resistant attachment style need a lot of reassurance and advice when they're having issues. And 4, disorganized. At work or school, whether they do it by pulling fire alarms, getting a coworker fired, or proudly breaking the rules, people with a disorganized attachment style love to test boundaries. Classmates and coworkers might see the person with a disorganized attachment style as charismatic, but they're the most likely to engage in mean girl type behaviors. In relationships, it can be downright challenging to have a close one with someone who has a disorganized attachment style because they can be aggressive, abusive, and manipulative. Loved ones of people with a disorganized attachment style often feel like they're replacing those that have hurt this person in the past in this person's current drama. In a crisis, because they often feel as though they're reliving past negativity or abuse, people with a disorganized attachment style often feel triggered by crisis. These feelings of being triggered can lead to explosive anger, substance abuse, and the need to punish others. Did you see yourself or anyone you know in any of those examples? More importantly,
Okay. So I believe you have a better glimpse or better understanding of the different attachment styles. But later on, I will also be explaining that again in relation to the parenting styles. But for now, I would like you to be in your groups again, or if you're alone, you can pause this video later on as you reflect on this question. What kind of attachment did you have as a child? And how do you see this kind of attachment affecting your current relationships? So if you are in groups of three, I would suggest that each of you can share for 5 minutes. So for this segment, you can pause this video for about 15 to 20 minutes. Now we'll proceed on to the parenting styles. As you have recognized the way that you attach to people, this also correlates to how our parents have parented us or how they have helped us grow. So we will be tackling on these 4 styles of parenting. Let us also remember that as you're studying about attachment theory and parenting styles, let's look at it like spectrum, or let's look at it as um, like a scale. And on the other end, that you're secure, and on the other end is in the insecure. So we cannot really label ourselves as this is the only attachment that we have, or this is the only style of parenting that we experience. But we look at it more as if we're in a scale, as we look at it not as we don't limit ourselves with just one attachment or one style, because we could really be a mixture of those attachment or the styles. Okay, so with that, let me share with you the first style of parenting, which is the authoritative parenting. Authoritative establish clear rules and expectations, discuss them with the child. Although they acknowledge the child's perspective, they both use relationship, reason, and power to enforce their standards. Children of these parents exhibit energetic, friendly behavior. Children are very self reliant and cheerful. They cope well with stress and are happy in trying to achieve something. So, this is actually the most ideal style of parenting. And how do we know if a parent is being authoritative? A parent is authoritative when he or she is responsive to the child's needs. So, whenever a child cries, that person is consistently responds to the child and is consistently available when the child genuinely needs her. And that parent or caregiver also displays interactive synchronicity. So that means the caregiver is aware and is sensitive to the child's signals when the child needs care, or maybe the child needs some space. An authoritative parent is also warm, set reasonable standards. So they're just not setting standards that are too hard to reach, but they know the kind of standard that they would put or they would set for a child. So it's not too low as well, but it's just the right standard. An authoritative parent also explains the reasons behind the rules. So you just don't impose, rules, just keep imposing them, but you would also explain why you make those rules, and then expect age appropriate behavior. So you wouldn't expect an infant or a toddler to know how to debate or know how to do adult stuff, to do some critical thinking. So an authoritative parent would expect the kind of behavior depending on the age of their children. So that parent is very sensitive what is the only knowledge or skill a child has in that's in their certain age. Authoritative parents also provide consistent and appropriate discipline. So they don't just discipline or for the sake of disciplining their child, but they know the right ways to discipline them and they do it consistently. They also allow their children to express themselves. So as I've learned also in my studies, that emotions are important to attend to, because our emotions help us know if there is something wrong within us. Later on, we'll actually be tackling more of how that works when it comes to in relation to the brain. But yeah, for now, I would just like to share the idea that a lot of kids who go through depression or have these kinds of mental health illnesses is most probably because of their suppressed emotions. A lot of young people grew up with parents or caregivers who did not allow them to express their feelings. And since their feelings are not accepted and their vulnerability is not welcomed, then they end up suppressing their emotions, which would result to suppression, and suppression may lead to depression. So, authoritative parents knows how to help their children regulate their emotions as well, by allowing them to express what they feel. Authoritative parents also seek balance for children's need for independence and the parents' desire to be listened to. There is a right timing for everything. So that an authoritative parent knows when the child needs to be taught how to be independent, but would also know if this child would still need a particular help on a specific area or aspect of that child's life. And then an authoritative parent also maintains authority and control, but values communication inside the home. Authoritative parents maintain their authority and don't let their children go out of control. So they set the right standards, they set the right control. So they're not also they're not overpowering, but they are empowering. They don't abuse their authority to dictate their children, but they use it wisely to empower them. So an example dialogue of an authoritative parent would be here. You can go out with your friends, but make sure you are home by 7 p.m. So see, there was a reasonable standard, and there's also still a sense of authority and control, but it's not also too rigid. So that is what authoritative parents do. Usually, when authoritative parenting happens, it leads to secure attachment. So, as we have also learned about the different attachments, a secure attachment, a person with a secure attachment possesses these things. Usually, um, secured people are energetic, they're friendly, self reliant, cheerful, achievement oriented. They are best adjusted. They know and can adapt to change right away. They exhibit positive social, emotional, and cognitive development. So that means they know how to solve their problems better. They also can display more empathy for others because their emotions are well regulated. They also get better grades, and they show more self-esteem, competence, and self-confidence since they are were given and they were parented in such a way that they were trusted, they were taught how to be independent. Then they also know and are confident of what they can do, and they're confident about their potential and their skills and abilities. Secured people people with secure attachment also develop closer relationships. They are the ones who can easily be intimate with other people because their parents were examples of trusting adults. They have provided a secure base for their children so that intimate relationships can also happen in the future. So just this is the cycle of security. This is an example of what happens when we give a secure base for our children. So every toddler, every child needs all these things. They want their parents to support them in their exploration, to watch over them, to help them, to enjoy with them, and to delight in them. So once they have finished exploring, there would be a time where they will go back to that secure base. So they also need there is also a need for them to have the safe haven where they will feel protected, comforted, delighted, and be helped organize their feelings. So the thing here when it comes to having a secure attachment, since children with secure attachments have a secure base, they're not very fearful when it comes to exploring the world, because whenever they fail or when they fall down, they know that someone is alongside them to help them and will eventually make sense of the things that they have explored, whether it's good or bad. So now we have seen the importance of really having a secure base and the perks of having a secure attachment. Okay, so that was the authoritative parenting. Now we move on to the authoritarian parenting. Parents establish rigid rules and expectation and strictly enforce them. These parents expect and demand obedience from their children. Children of these parents are often conflicted and irritable in behavior. So they're either, these children can be moody, unhappy, and vulnerable to stress, and they're also often unfriendly. So, what are the characteristics of authoritarian parents? They are usually demanding. So, unlike authoritative parents, they are unresponsive and rejecting. They may really just tend to ignore a baby's signals or really either interact with them in an angry or irritable way. So let's say a baby cries, it's either they won't attend to the cries or either they will shout, they will yell at the baby for crying. And then authoritarian parents can also rarely have close bodily contact with their babies, since they usually just ignore the baby. They don't um, they just let them cry and not comfort them at all. Then they can also be strict and controlling. So because of that, they can have harsh or strict punishments. It can really be harsh. Then they're also rigid. They don't, unlike authoritative parents, they don't bother to explain the reason behind the rules that they make. And they also expect complete obedience. So it's pretty hard for kids who have authoritarian parents to make mistakes, because parents expect that they would completely obey, or they really already know what is right from what is wrong. So they're really just like what I mentioned, they're rigid and they can be very controlling. So an example of this, of a dialogue of an authoritarian parent would be, no, you are not allowed to go out with your friends. So the parents are just concerned about what they think about, or they're just concerned about themselves. They don't really care about what the child needs or desires. And authoritarian parenting often leads to insecure avoidant attachment. So, with an insecure avoidant attachment, a child can really be timid, have lower self esteem, since they're not trusted to explore, or they're not given the opportunity to exercise what they want, since their parents are very controlling. So they start to have a lesser confidence in themselves, so they're also afraid of taking risks. They rely to certain degree of authority, so when they grow up they would also need a source of authority to rule over them. They are conflicted and irritable children who are vulnerable to stressors, and then they can really grow to be very fearful, and then moody, unhappy, aimless, deceitful. They alternate between aggressive behaviors and sulky withdrawal. And because they have these kinds of behaviors, they will generally be disliked by their peers. I mean, who wants to, be friends with someone who's unfriendly, right? So that is the result of being too authoritarian. So that is the insecure avoidant. And now the third kind, or the third style of parenting, would be the permissive parenting. The permissive parents let their children's preference takes priority over their ideals, and they rarely force the children to conform to their standards. Children of these parents generally exhibit impulsive, aggressive behavior. These children are often rebellious, domineering, and low achievers. So, for this kind of parenting, parents who are permissive are usually at the start, they can be very, inconsistent in responding to the needs of the child. It's either they will be available, but there are also times that they aren't. So they're very inconsistent. These parents are also awkward when it comes to interacting with their children, and they offer little affection. They have reasonably affectionate relationship with the child, but can be too lenient. They just allow their child to do whatever they want. And then they provide inconsistent discipline. Sometimes they discipline them, sometimes they don't. They encourage their children to act on their impulses. So whenever their children are having tantrums or have these impulses, they don't do anything about it. When these parents also withdraw their affection as a type of punishment, so that can be um, also called as silent treatment. They also avoid confrontations. Permissive parents also desire to compensate what they lacked as a child, which are freedom and material. So usually these parents may have grown up where they felt limited, and they didn't enjoy a lot of things, which is why when they became parents, they made sure that they gave everything they gave everything to their children, which is not bad to give their needs, but sometimes too much of it, or um too much of allowing your children to have control can be very unhelpful for your children, because as a result, they can grow up being demanding as well, and um, always wanting their desires and demands to be attended to right away. Then, for these kinds of parents, they also view their children as mini adults. They think that since they think that, oh, okay, these children already know what they're doing. They know what is right and wrong. Then I should just treat them just like an adult. So these are usually the beliefs of permissive parents. And permissive parenting often leads to insecure, resistant, or ambivalent attachment. And these kinds of people are the ones who are entitled. They also exhibit low self control and self reliance. So, just like what I mentioned, they tend to demand a lot and want it immediately. They appear immature for their age. They also can be anxious. They show little initiative. They can be aggressive, domineering, uncontrollable. They vacillate quickly between anger and cheerfulness. They are impulsive and non-compliant, and then rebellious, then low achieving. Okay, so that's for the permissive parenting. For the last parenting style, it is called uninvolved. They ignore the child, letting the child preferences prevail as long as those preferences do not interfere with the parents' activities. So children of uninvolved parents are often loners, withdrawn, and low achievers. So we have also seen that earlier from the video about the different attachment, right? So what do uninvolved parents do? Usually, uninvolved parenting is linked to maternal depression. And uninvolved parents can either really be so neglectful or abuse their children. So child neglect is actually a form of abuse. So there are also other kinds of abuses. This includes physical, emotional, and a lot more. And then uninvolved parents can be indifferent or actively neglect their children. So they focus on their own needs to the exclusion of the child's needs. They don't care about the child at all. They often don't know where their children are. So so they don't really know who they usually hang out with, who they're with, or where they're at. These parents can tend to be also be too busy for work, which is why they don't have any time for their children. And they rarely converse with their children. They really don't engage with their children at all. And an example statement or dialogue from an involved parent is, do what you want in your life. You're on your own. So maybe, oh, okay. And then uninvolved parenting also often leads to insecure, disorganized attachment. So that's the last type of attachment. And these people who have insecure, disorganized attachment are socially incompetent. They are irresponsible and immature. They can be moody, lonely, withdrawn, aggressive, non-compliant, low achieving, suffer from low self-esteem. And as teenagers, what happens is that they become associated with skipping school, delinquency, arrests, and precocious sexuality. These children have been traumatized, have been abused, which is why these are just some of the typical things that they would experience or would have, or these are the typical behaviors they'd have when they grow up. And looking at the bigger picture, so you see here, when you're authoritative, you have high love and high control, and that results having healthy children. An authoritarian parent has low love but high control, which may result in neurotic children. And then permissive parenting has high love but low control, so their children tend to be spoiled brats. And uninvolved parenting has low love and low control, in which their children become juvenile delinquents. So let us remember that, and the way we parent our children corresponds to how they will also relate as children. And the early years of their lives, and particularly 3 years, the first 3 years sets the template for their personality. So as early as a toddler, as early as possible, we would want to give them the kind of attachment or the kind of care that they need so that they can grow up to be healthy children. And now that we have discussed about attachment, we have discussed about the different parenting styles, we have a glimpse of maybe why we have this kind, why we parent this way, why we disciple a certain way. So with that, if you're also with your group right now, I would want you to pause this video and maybe take about 15 to 20 minutes again to discuss and share within your group this question. What parenting style did you experience growing up, and which style appeals to you the most? Why? Okay, so now maybe some of you are discouraged, or maybe you might be thinking how sad life is because you realize that growing up, you've been having an insecure attachment. But you know what? There's actually a solution for that. Um, we may have caregivers or maybe people who have attached to us in a unhealthy way, but there is a way for us to have an acquired secure attachment. And the solution to that is what we call neuroplasticity. So before we go on to the neuroplasticity, it's important also to know how the brain works. So we will better understand how a person can still change. So, just like, just um, the different developments of our body, the brain is also being developed throughout the years. But actually, when you were when we were born, other parts or other organs that we have been developed already, but the brain is the only one that's underdeveloped. So let us understand how a brain develops. A brain develops from, let's look at it at this way. This is Perry's neurosequential model. The brain, according to Perry, develops from downward to upward. So from 0 to 6 months, the brain stem is being developed, and that is in charge of the heart rate, the fight, flight, and freeze response. When we become, or when a child becomes 6 months or 2 years old, that is where the midbrain is being developed. So this is in charge of the coordination and the movement. Usually, these children who are 6 months to 2 years are just starting to learn how to walk, to crawl, to do things with their hands, with their feet. And then from 2 years to 7 years, that is the only time when they get to learn how that is when their limbic system is being developed. And this is in charge of the emotional response. So we have to understand particularly these two functions, the limbic and the cortical, because they are the crucial parts that we're also going to be tackling more on. Look at limbic system as like a mediator between your behavior and your emotion. So whenever a person or whenever a child experiences something like an emotion, that person is not yet able to put words into what that child feels, right? So what usually happens is the child acts upon his or her emotions. And then when that child becomes 7 to adult or more, to 7 years or more, then that's the only time that they would be able to learn how to control themselves, have empathy towards others, and really be literate, like really know how to solve problems, think critically. Because by the time that they're still in the limbic system, they still haven't they still don't know the skill of really empathizing or really regulating their emotions. That comes when the cortical is being developed. So knowing that fact makes us understand that the reason why kids do tantrums is because they literally don't know how to tell their caregivers what is wrong with them. So they show their caregivers their emotions. They usually show their anger or their happiness to make them feel, to let them know how they're feeling, whether they're hurt or they're sad or they're happy. So tantrums are actually a normal part of development because they don't really know how to deal with their emotions at that time yet. They don't know how to put words into their emotions yet. That's why they tend to bring it out. They tend to bring it in that way. So the key here is for a parent or for a parent or caregiver to understand that those kids who are just 2 years or to 7 years old are still not able, to really think logically as much as adults are. So we need to be more patient when it comes to dealing with them, since they still don't have any sense of what is right from what is wrong. So yeah, let's take note of that. More about how our limbic and cortical. So whenever if we'll also look at it in our own experiences, usually how you're at the peak of your emotion, and like let's say you're angry and then someone tells you something right, or let's say an advice, but you're at the peak of an emotion, how you usually don't respond to it. So that's because you're functioning from your limbic system. So in order for your prefrontal cortex, which is in charge of the critical thinking logically, to take place, you first have to deal with the limbic system side of your brain. You have to first deal with your emotions. So now we're getting more deeper into talking about emotions, right? Okay, so as you can see here, the ability of the brain to change its response to experiences is actually higher when you're much younger compared to when you're older. And when you get older, the more that it's actually harder for your behaviors or your habits to change. It requires more efforts, which is why parenting or learning about child development is very crucial, because the early years of their lives sets the stage for what they may become in the long run. And to deal with that, to help us, and for us to also know how we can cause change, if let's say, okay, I admit it's not, it didn't have any, let's say, secure attachment. So let's say we didn't have that ideal attachment growing up. So the purpose, or one of the solution for us, or the solution for us to change, is what I mentioned to you, is the neuroplasticity. I want to let you watch this video on neuroplasticity.
Not so long ago, many scientists believed that the brain did not change after childhood, that it was hardwired and fixed by the time we became adults. But recent advances in only the last decade now tell us that this is simply not true. The brain can and does change throughout our lives. It is adaptable, like plastic. Hence, neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity. How does neuroplasticity work? If you think of your brain as a dynamic, connected power grid, there are billions of pathways or roads lighting up every time you think, feel, or do something. Some of these roads are well-travelled. These are our habits, our established ways of thinking, feeling, and doing. Every time we think in a certain way, practice a particular task, or feel a specific emotion, we strengthen this road. It becomes easier for our brains to travel this pathway. Say we think about something differently, learn a new task, or choose a different emotion. We start carving out a new road. If we keep travelling that road, our brains begin to use this pathway more, and this new way of thinking, feeling, or doing becomes second nature. The old pathway gets used less and less and weakens. This process of rewiring your brain by forming new connections and weakening old ones is neuroplasticity in action. The good news is that we all have the ability to learn and change by rewiring our brains. If you have ever changed a bad habit or thought about something differently, you have carved a new pathway in your brain and experienced neuroplasticity firsthand. With repeated and directed attention towards your desired change, you can rewire your brain.
Thank God there is hope for change. And thank you for neuroplasticity. And now that we know these things, how then now can we attune to the emotional needs of our children? We know the importance of attending to their emotions, which actually helps them, regulate their behavior in the long run. And each child has different needs as well, depending on how old they are. And this table actually just shows a summary of that. These children at an early age can have questions on how to be secure, how to be independent, how to be powerful, good, how to fit into the adult world. Who am I? These things in different stages of the development of a child. Caregivers, children needs caregivers to attend to these emotional needs. And so with that, I have come up with the 4 E's of parenting, in which I was also inspired to by our discussions in class and by the different experiences of parents that I've talked to and how they would parent their children. So the first E I would like to introduce would be empathize. So empathize is simply just listening, being there for them, reflecting what they felt. Sometimes it also goes beyond the verbal. So observing their nonverbal communication, allowing them to feel like what I've mentioned earlier, that as parents, we would also need to help to let our children express what they feel. And it's feeling with them and putting yourself in their shoes. I would really like to emphasize empathy, or empathizing, because as we have learned earlier about the limbic system, about the prefrontal cortex, the way that we deal with their emotions really affects a lot how they would develop as old people, or as they become older. So empathy is a way to help them deal with those emotions when they are in their limbic system. For them to function in their for them to be able to think logically, we first need to deal with them in their emotions. And the answer to that is to first empathize. Of course, there will be perfect time. There would be a best time to educate and advise. But if they're in the peak of their emotions, one way to do that is to empathize. So what not to do if you're empathizing? So this is just there's so much to really cover when it comes to empathy, but these are very hand just or a quick run through on some ideas on how you shouldn't empathize. Okay, so these are called the empathy blockers. The first one would be downplaying. This could be like, downplaying sounds like, don't cry, it is not that bad, it is not the end of the world. So you're usually just minimizing the problem of the person. One upping is, an example would be, even I myself have trouble doing that compared to me. So it's like you're trying to let the person know that your problem is that you're now focusing on yourself more than on the emotion of the person, because you're saying that, oh, ako nga, I was able to do this compared to me. And then for the reasoning, you would say, don't be angry, he did not mean to hurt you. So yes, you can, there is a time for reasoning, but when you're empathizing, that can really be an empathy blocker, because it means that you're actually invalidating their feelings. So when you're empathizing, you want to make sure that you're validating them. You're validating what they feel. They can, you know, they may think or they may have a wrong behavior, but for you to, before you correct that wrong behavior, you would need to first deal with their emotions. So reasoning won't help if you want to first empathize with them. And then the positive spin is more like, look on the bright side, it happened for a good reason. So it's like you negate their negative emotions. And then cheering up is, don't worry, things will get better. So here's usually you'd offer something like a food, or you'd offer something that will make them feel better. Though this is helpful, but not when you're empathizing. So there's a time for this as well. Advising is, maybe you can try doing this. I think you should. So again, there's a right time for advising. If the person does not need advice at the moment, then it's really not recommended that you advise, when that person just simply needs for you to listen to him. Sometimes a person just needs someone to live for him to listen to. Your presence can actually just be enough, even if you don't say anything. That can actually be a form that you're empathizing with them. Your mere presence is already a comfort for them. And then blaming, see, I told you that you should have not done that. So who wants to be blamed, right? The more you'd feel bad already, since you're already feeling bad, the more you'd feel bad if you'd be blamed. And then putting down is more of, don't be silly, that's ridiculous. So again, you're negating and you're invalidating the feeling. Spiritualizing is, the Bible says all things will work together for good. So it can really be not helpful when they're not thinking logically yet. They can even have harsh comments, or maybe harsh reactions to scriptures, which should be a source of comfort if we over or spiritualize things. And then labeling is, you are just being too sensitive. So again, that's like invalidating their emotions. Distracting is, oh, look at this cool gadget I just bought. Though, at a point in time, they might feel better, but that's not really going to solve their problem. You're just distracting them, but that's not really solving the problem or helping them deal with their emotion. Then stealing the thunder is, now you know how it feels to be rejected like I did. Now that's really torture. That's really hard on the person if that person was already going through something terrible, and then that person will be told about that. So yeah, these are just some empathy blockers that we should be aware of, that we shouldn't do when we're trying to empathize a person or our children. So some of the things that might be helpful when we want to empathize with them is, here's our some sample dialogues. So I'm sorry to hear that. I'm sorry that happened to you or you felt that way. I see and hear where you're coming from. I can imagine how hard that is for you. I understand why you felt that way. If I were in your shoes, I would probably feel the same way. You must have been so disappointed. It must be difficult for you this time to deal with your friend because you got hurt. So when you're empathizing, you're actually really just reflecting what the person feels. And when you think the advice would be needed already, then that's the only time you give it. But most of the time, our children just really wants empathy. So one example of this that you can do with a toddler is, let's say your toddler is having tantrums. So when you tell your toddler that's having tantrum to stop crying, or maybe any of those empathy blockers, that won't help, right? They'll just keep crying and crying. So the way for you to help that toddler stop from being to stop having that tantrum is you would put words into what they feel. Oh, I can see that you became very disappointed when you didn't get the blue cup, and instead of the you got the blue cup instead of the pink one. I'm sure you really like the pink one. So once they understand and once you have put words into their emotions, the more it will make sense. The more that they'll trust you because you understand them, and they will give you permission to let them, you know, let them educate themselves. So like once you empathize with them, you can already tell them, but we're only able to get the pink one because that's the most affordable, something like that. So empathizing really goes a long way, even in all ages, not just when it comes to children. Empathy is a really helpful technique, or a helpful way of communicating to our loved ones, to our friends, so they would feel heard, and that we can also help them organize and regulate their behavior. So that's the first one. I'm really into empathizing. Okay, so the second one would be encourage. And I would say this also as an affirmation. So I think more than telling up when a person or when a young person would do something bad, I think it would be helpful if you will, when you give your feedback or comment, you would first encourage that person, empathize, instead of pointing out the bad things, because usually when we always point out the negative on a person, they would feel that I don't I there's nothing good that I can do, I might as well be bad. So when we encourage, we should at least focus on the positive. Let's see the best in them and catch them when they are doing good. Usually, when you compliment someone or when you yourself get encouragement, right, or being affirmed for what you're doing, the tendency is you would also want to keep doing better, and you would want to, do what is good and what is best because you're being built up and you're being affirmed. So that is the reason why, instead of putting down a child or putting down young people, we should encourage them more and then catch them whenever they have done something good so that they'll keep doing that good behavior. Then, yeah, we affirm them not just when they have finished something, but also we affirm them for their progress or effort, because um, sometimes they haven't already reached, they just have this kind of capacity, but progress and effort or actually already an achievement in itself. And if they're being affirmed by their progress or effort, the more that they will keep on going, they will continue until they will finish. And then part of encouraging is also showering them in words and making them feel loved and accepted. We want to be able to show the kind of love that is unconditional, where the children will not feel like they're only being loved when they perform good or well, but when they are loved, even if they make mistakes, and they are being forgiven, they are loved and accepted no matter what, the more that they will become resilient, and the more that they will have a positive outlook in their life, the more that they can, um, you know, have a secure attachment. Okay, so the third E would be empower. Empower is letting them learn and not rescuing them all the time. Sometimes you have the tendency to not let children get hurt or suffer, but actually, allowing them to struggle is part of growing. If they don't experience some sort of suffering or pain in their lives, they wouldn't really know how to be independent or deal with the future pain they might experience. So a way for us to empower them is also to help them become independent, allowing them to make mistakes and allowing them to learn from their mistakes. A way to also empower is, more than lecturing and advising or giving lectures. Yeah, we can ask questions that would empower them. We can ask questions that would help them think critically, would think for themselves, so that when they grow up, they would also know and learn how um, they can survive on their own. They would be able to um, trust in their abilities and have self confidence. And the last one would be engage. I think this is also something that's being neglected now, that parents think that when their children are much older, like they're not infants anymore, they don't need the time as much anymore. But actually, at all levels or at all ages, children really need time from their parents, because even when, especially now, the youth, these children who are in high school, elementary, they're dealing with identity crisis. They're dealing with different issues they haven't encountered before. Some of them are falling in love. Some of them all have these kinds of issues that need to be guided by their parents. So I would really recommend that we would really engage our children. And one way to also do that is to model. As the saying goes, I've learned that more is caught than taught. More than teaching them the ways of how to live, the more actually they learn more when they see you doing it to them, or when they see you doing what they're supposed to do, which is why more or much time is really important to spend time with them. And then again, like I mentioned already, educate at the right time. There is a time for you to also teach your children. There's a time for you to empathize with them, and all these things. So your children really needs guidance and need an adult who would be there for them and who would help them out whenever they're stuck. And right now, as your children become adolescent, or when your children become much older, soon they will be adults and they'll also need friends. And what better way for their parents to be their friends as well, that they can run to whenever they need help and whenever life seems overwhelming. So yeah, there's actually more to it. There's more that we can do for our children and even for ourselves to really have the kind of right attachments. And I would say this as also from my personal experience, that even if I might not have the ideal attachment growing up, but because yeah, I have friends and I have people, I belonged in groups that provided secure attachment for me. That's also how I'm also able to build up my own secure base as well for the future. So even if you don't have, let's say, the typical or ideal parent who will provide with you with a secure base, then you could also find people who will, support you and give you that secure base as well. Since we're still growing, and thank you, neuroplasticity, that there is hope for our brains to change. We can still rewire our habits, our attitudes. And yeah, I would really encourage you that as you know these things, it's really hard to give what you don't have. So it's good that you would really join groups, or be with people who can give you that kind of secure attachment as well, so that you know how to provide this to your children as well. So I hope this has helped you. This whole program and my talk has helped you a lot when it comes to understanding the youth. I believe this will also come in handy when it comes to youth ministers, to those who are ministering to the youth. So at least you now have a better glimpse of how a person develops and how you can maybe become a bridge as well for them and their parents. So with that, I want to end with this reflection question. Among yourselves, may you discuss this question. What is your main takeaway from this talk? And what do you want to apply as a parent, caregiver, or a discipler? So that is it for this psychoeducation program. I hope you have learned a lot. And these are some of the sources that I got where I got my presentation. I hope this was really something that will benefit you in the long run. And again, I would like to thank my classmates and my professor for all the knowledge that I have gained throughout our course with this. And may you also not just keep it in yourself, but also spread this knowledge. So again, with that, I would like to end. Thank you again for listening. Till next time, bye.